Right, you have to pretend that we haven't just fallen out now.
Oh no. Never had to do that before.
Feels a bit strange, just you and me.
Doesn't feel like it's working.
It's been a while since we've had just a one-on-one. Meow.
I think you're missing the point of that. It has to actually be an innuendo rather than just...
You hope I'm missing the point of that.
Mm-hmm.
This is gonna be a weird one.
No, it's not.
How long is it since we didn't have a guest on?
Not that long.
Fine. Fuck you then.
Actually, it might have been before New Year, so quite a while actually.
What's that thing when you're not the predator, you're the preyed on? Prey. Yeah. Basically, anything I say is gonna be prey tonight, isn't it?
I'm just responding in my normal sarcastic way.
No, you're not. You're in a funny mood tonight.
Whatever you say. I'm normally like this. You're just normally more immune to it.
More tolerant.
Whatever. Right, let's get this shit show on the road.
If we must. You didn't bring any bombs, did you?
What?
You didn't bring any bombs.
Expand, explain, whatever.
Oh, just get on with the podcast. Fucking hell, wake up.
I can't be asked for anything right now.
Well, we could just talk bollocks if you want.
What we tend to do is just...
I know, but we tend to be quite energetic about it normally, don't we?
Right.
I feel less under pressure because we don't have a live voyeur. That's so Scottish.
We
Do you know, I actually...
shut the fuck up.
Do you know what I thought to myself earlier on?
No,
I've never actually thought... I've never actually thought to myself...
starting the fucking thing, you little twat.
Oh, he's woken up now. I actually thought to myself, mechty me, it's windy. I thought that.
It's not mechty-me, it's mick-to-me.
It's not. Oh,
It's kind of a combination.
It can be either.
I've never heard
I don't know.
Mech-to-me.
Mechty. Maybe it's mechty, I don't know. Who knows? Mechty mouse.
Fuck off. Butchering Scottish culture. See, I'm either fueled by like enthusiasm for the actual channel or just pure hatred for you, and it's getting towards that, so let's do this thing.
I'm upset now.
Right, shut the fuck up. Let's do the intro.
You've been enthusiastic about the channel.
Shut the fuck up.
I can't. You're just too tempting to wind up.
I know.
What?
You know what I think it is?
2-letter word beginning with I and ending in T.
Took me too long.
Yep. What? What is it?
It's 3 years since my first breakup.
Oh.
I just thought that, to be honest, it probably isn't. That is probably just that I have no energy because life.
What, to the day?
Yeah. I think so. It was either today or yesterday.
I can't even remember what day my first breakup was.
Well, I can only remember because I've looked at the Skype conversation in which it happened. So.
Oh, God. Yeah.
You probably
goodness, these things don't have... No.
Unless someone broke up to you by post and signed a date on it.
I don't still have the old paper diary where I used to keep records of my relationship progress.
Did you really have that? I'm not sure how much of a sado you really are.
I do remember having a symbol that I'd put by the day if I'd done it that day.
Dare I ask what was the symbol?
Well, it was actually it was actually a letter.
What was it?
It was an F.
Fucking wanker.
I was a teenager.
sad,
I used to keep count. I'd waited so long. I just wanted to know if I was managing to make up for lost time, I suppose.
You're a twat.
Yeah, but I was more of a twat then.
Don't know.
We were talking over 20 years ago. Is that right? No. Over 30 years ago, sorry. How old am I?
Very.
No, hang on.
Very.
Yeah, over 30 years ago. Is that right? Yeah, I'm just trying to do the maths. Yeah.
Good luck with that. Right. Now, we're out for a rodeo. I would like to actually
Did you say we're up for a rodeo?
What?
I'm sure you said we're up for a rodeo.
I said we're out for a rodeo. How do you...
Oh, further adieu. 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 Is that from a Disney musical?
Yeah, maybe the reason why I had such low energy is I was just expecting you to be a twat. But now I think I've accepted that I can get on with this if you actually fucking let me and stop being such a twat.
Is that going to happen though?
No, but just, give me just, 10 seconds.
Come on, because we've got lots of news to share.
You need to shut the fuck up.
I feel like we
will
can't
behead you.
Fucking hell, jihad. Yeah, this. I feel like we can't. I feel like we can't do this full-on banter like that people have missed so much from our mouths when we are being watched. No offence to people that have taken part. It's been great having other people on, but sometimes it's nice to just get back to basics and torture you without anyone watching.
Yeah, because I think the guilt kind of kicks in more when there's someone else.
Yeah, I feel like
there.
Yeah, especially if they're actually looking at you, because you feel like they're saying, "What the fuck are you doing?" Whereas there's just no holding back when there's no.
When Craig's on, he just tends to join in.
I could edit this out, but
you could do,
but I won't.
Right, let's fucking begin, and you will not interrupt me.
Well, the
shut up.
Logic's been running for over 10 minutes.
Shut the fuck up.
This could be the longest intro yet. Ooh. What colour is that? I nearly snotted in my beer then. Green, probably. Oh, sorry, no, I asked that, not you.
You just have a conversation with yourself and made that the fucking podcast.
I could, couldn't I?
Is that what Better Call Paul is?
Yeah, that's my...
Because I've not listened to it in a while.
It hasn't happened for a while. I'm actually thinking of restarting that, rebooting it, because things have changed big time. And I'm onto a new chapter in my life. But I feel like that should be part of the podcast and not the intro, because you still haven't got to the beginning bit yet.
I swear to God.
You don't believe in God.
That's how powerful my hatred is of you. You've re-inspired my faith. Well, yeah, inspired my faith in God.
Hate and love are actually quite
so
close
that I
to
can
each
swear
other. The opposite of love is indifference.
That I'm going to murder.
It's a strong emotion. You hold strong emotions for me.
I'm aware of that.
We'll get on with the podcast then.
Again, theme of the breakup. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. We could talk about breakups.
We could do, but let's not. Because we got a subject of why we...
I know, but I've got some breakups that I could...
We could have done that in our love episode for last year's Valentine.
Should we just change the episode title and talk about breakups?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, because that's fucking weird.
It's not. I've got quite a few breakups behind me.
Yeah, but it's weird to record that on this day.
I wouldn't name any names. Although some people that listen might know some of those people. I do know some people know me. No.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I do know some people listen that knew me from a former life.
Right.
And I'm not
Shall we wait, no, we're doing extremism.
Okay.
And shall we fucking begin?
We'll mention it somewhere along the line.
I will avoid it and ignore it if you do.
What, extremism?
No. Breakups.
Extreme breakups. Sounds like a cable TV series.
Shut the fuck up!
Extreme ice truckers. Oh shit! Mind your microphone. They're expensive. They are.
Is your windpipe expensive?
You're getting threatening again. Am I being as annoying as I was on the as yet unreleased anniversary recording? You haven't hit me yet, so probably not.
No, that was just endurance. I had to do that for upwards of 3 hours.
Yeah, do you think the camera might run out of battery before we've actually started the podcast?
Right, do you want to just shut your fucking mouth and keep it shut until I have said, hello internet, I am Firebolt?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wanker. I'm about to pull this over your head. See, the thing is, I know that you're actually thinking of the words that you would be saying if your mouth was open. Your mouth closed, it sounds like you got a Welsh accent.
That's what she said. Meh.
No, but that's what you said.
Let's start the podcast.
Hello internet, I'm Firebolt.
And I'm the Orbiter!
That didn't
can't
take
read
a
on.
fucking age.
Oh, God.
Right, welcome to, what episode is this?
55.
Yep, we're in a bit of a...
What do you mean, yep?
I'm acknowledging it.
You're asking me a question. You don't know how to say no. It's not a quiz.
Maybe it is.
Okay.
Right. Oh, Jesus, this is a fucking disaster already, but let's continue. News. There's actually been some pretty big news, although kind of not news because it was so expected that it may as well not be, but it's still, it happened.
Yeah.
Brexit. We have now left the European Union.
Oh, is that since the last episode?
Yeah, it would have been.
Yeah. So I can't remember, was it David Lammy? Don't know. Somebody I was seeing who was making stupid comments about, oh look, we've now left the European Union and planes haven't fallen out of the sky. There's still food on the shelves.
That wouldn't have been David Lammy. David Lammy is quite anti-Brexit.
Or maybe he was the one that replied to it then.
Probably.
Just going on about how everything hasn't fallen apart like the Project Fear doom mongers were saying it was going to.
Yeah, it's just sort of like, that's because basically nothing that tangible has happened other than like we've officially left.
Except that this bullshit about austerity coming to an end clearly hasn't.
We'll get onto that.
Yeah.
Only thing that really has changed is our MEPs can no longer actually vote in European Parliament. But to be honest, that's kind of a positive for Europe
them.
as a whole.
Yeah.
Because most of our MEPs are fucking twats and Brexit MEPs. So.
You see the fucking dickheads waving their tiny little Britain flags.
Yeah, the amount of bullshit I've seen from them. Oh, there was one where a Brexit MEP asked a question in the middle of a Green MEP's speech saying, oh, how do you know all of this is going to happen after Brexit? Do you have a degree in economics? It's like, actually, I'm a professor in it, thank you.
Yeah. Got 2 master's degrees or goodness knows what else. Yeah, that was a humiliating... But it's just... Oh, anyway. We know how ridiculous it is. Other side of the Atlantic,
Yes.
just as ridiculous.
Donald
Be interesting
Trump
to see.
has been acquitted.
Yeah. Be interesting to see how he's come out, like, public-wise. But...
Oh, he's basically come out saying, oh no, they lost, I've been completely vindicated, and he's fired
Trouble is,
the witnesses.
I mean, it's a
involved.
similar kind of situation to here, in that anything that you say or do that supports what we consider to be sensible viewpoints, it just doesn't work in the argument to try and persuade the kind of people that vote for all of this bullshit, because it's like, you're already voting for this bullshit, so you're not going to listen to reason. Do you know what I mean?
At New Year's, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this on the podcast, I was watching, basically, have you heard of Charlie Brooker's Wipe? Yearly Wipe?
Yes. I think I possibly watched 2 or 3 of them in a row, because he does it every year, doesn't he?
Yeah, at New Year's they had the older ones.
Yeah.
But I mean, it actually stopped in 2016 because it got very depressing after that point.
Oh, right, okay.
They were just didn't really want to make that anymore. And I think they went on to make Philomena Kunk.
Oh, yeah.
And probably Black Mirror came around about that time, so Charlie Brooker got busy. But basically it was going through the news of the year, and one in 2014, I think the first one, was talking about basically how Putin, although a horrific despot, is still massively popular in Russia.
Yeah.
It was basically his advisor or minister flooded Russia with just loads of confusion, basically.
Yeah.
So he would back extremist groups, which we'll get onto, or people that oppose one another, to try and make it seem as though, oh, no one really knows what they're doing, so let's just go with what's already happening, because that's at least semi-okay.
I kind of find that living in that kind of environment of disinformation, while I want to make a difference when I can, without like actually becoming a politician or anything, I feel like the rest of the time I'm moving towards having to kind of just switch off from it. Although you do want to make sure that you keep informed and you know what's going on and you know when you can make a difference. Like, you know, I mean, for instance, when there's independence marches and stuff like that, if I'm free, I would love to take part in them, in the same way as Extinction Rebellion, when they're planning stuff, I would love to take part in that. But the rest of the time, you feel like, just to stay sane and to actually not just want to kill yourself, you've got to just kind of focus on your own life a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, now that it seems, well, I'm vaguely paying attention to how independents move forward, but what did you say that they were going to hold one later this year, but it wasn't recognised by the UK government?
As I understand it, the way things stand at the moment is it's going through the courts as to whether or not Scotland has a right to hold a referendum without consent of Westminster, or I can't remember. There's something. Basically, it's going through the courts, but it is the High Court of Session in Scotland that it's going through,
right?
Which has as much legal weight. I mean, obviously, the High Court in England would probably trump that, but
it would seem like, I mean, it's from everything I've seen, like the High Court of Scotland has ruled most of the things that the Tories have done in relation to Brexit unlawful, but they don't give a shit.
No. So I think Nicola Sturgeon's trying to go about it in as legal a way as possible. I don't know whether or not she would go so far as to have an advisory referendum, which, let's face it, a referendum is only advisory anyway. But I suppose the difference is that if Westminster hasn't sanctioned it, then the outcome isn't legally implementable. Although you've got to at that point think, well, if there was an advisory referendum and it came out overwhelmingly in favour of independence, even if it wasn't recognised by Westminster, all Scotland's then got to do is declare itself independent and see what the United Nations thinks of it.
Yeah, because
once they recognise a country as independent, it is.
It looks pretty... Well, the thing is that the UK is part of the people that get to make that decision.
Yeah, but did you say they have a veto?
Well, if there's 5 members that can basically if a nation's to be recognised, that those 5 countries need to recognise it. There's possibly a 6th one that's like a rotation of other countries.
Right.
The UK is one of them.
There was the point that European countries or EU countries were in the past were holding back from passing too much comment on whether or not Scotland would be allowed back into Europe. But now that the UK is outside of the EU, they don't have to diplomatically keep a distance anymore. They can now say, and I did like the picture, when Nicola Sturgeon said to the Europe about leaving a light on for us, did you see the picture of the Brussels Parliament building where there was a light? They'd left a light on.
But, I think basically people in the EU were hoping as much as possible that they could stop the UK from having such a catastrophic exit, but it doesn't seem like anything that good's been arranged, and unless there's a new deal agreed by the end of the year, which is incredibly unlikely given how long the last one took, and that they'll probably still put up red lines of, we won't let that happen because we don't want that.
The thing is, it's all the brinksmanship that's happening now even more, isn't it? There's all this kind of, stubborn kind of almost Mexican standoff. But Europe don't have anything to lose anymore.
I have noticed that the Tories have gotten very sort of Orwellian, where they're banning certain words being used. They don't like the word Brexit anymore, even though it was their main campaign slogan. Instead of saying no deal, they're now saying an Australian deal, which, by the way, Australia doesn't currently have a deal with the EU. It's currently negotiating it, so that is basically just saying no deal.
Yeah.
And they tried to ban certain publications from number 10 briefings.
But there was also, wasn't it the fact that Australia has some really good trade deals with the majority of Eastern Asia?
Yeah, well, it kind of makes sense geographically.
Yeah, so it's like, while trading with the EU is obviously a good goal for them, it's not like their top priority because we're on the opposite side of the planet. So
the other deal that they suggested was a Canada deal, which has tariffs on, I think,
maple syrup.
Yeah, it has no tariffs on 98% of goods. I think that's how that works.
Right.
So things like maple syrup probably would be taxed, but other things
it's quite expensive here, maple syrup.
Yeah, so that might be why. I don't know, it might be that 98% of goods are taxed and there's 2% that aren't, or it might be the other way around. I'm not actually sure. Either way, it's worse than the current deal we currently have. But we don't currently have it. It's just sort of have it until 2020, end of 2020.
Mm-hmm. Oh, coronavirus is officially more deadly than SARS was now.
I don't even know what SARS is.
SARS was something acute respiratory syndrome. It was the last sort of big virus to come out of China kind of area. And it was a kind of a global emergency kind of thing going on. They were trying to stop the spread of that, but it's already killed more people than that, apparently.
It's not that it's not a problem, but the main thing I've seen from it is that people are using it to justify racism.
Yeah, well, they'll use anything to justify that, won't they?
It just reminds me of the whole panic around Ebola, which basically anyone black was seen as a potential disease carrier by idiots, yes, but some of those idiots had some power.
Where do you hear from these idiots? Because I don't see some of these things. I tend to switch off from the media idiots, but
well, that'll be why you don't see them.
Well, yeah, because I don't believe the media. I just think they're kind of
it's not that I don't have to believe them. It's just that they still have an influence in the world, and I'd like to be aware of that, what that is in some regard.
It's a difficult one, isn't it, though, because the fact that you want to be aware of that kind of gives them an effect on you, even if it's not the effect that they're... Or maybe it is the effect they're looking for, because it's division is what's intended, isn't it, really?
But it's just...
Some people will go with their story and other people will rile against it, like yourself.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's not really like the newspaper publication type idiots.
Right.
It's more... I don't know. I think some of it is making jokes, but some people genuinely try and make a buck off of selling face masks to protect from it, outside of China.
Right. Okay. Because a lot of them wear them anyway for the pollution, don't they? Which I can understand.
But
having lived in London,
yeah, and their cities are a lot lower quality.
Used to come home from a day in London with black snot.
Yeah.
So yeah, austerity is back.
I mean, it never really went. It's just... No. Basically, you can safely assume that anything that comes out of nearly any Tory's mouth is probably a heap of shit.
Yeah, all the government departments have been asked to cut. And personal news?
I'm apparently no longer disabled, or at least I'm able to go to work and support myself.
So yeah, as of...
Which is bullshit.
When is it? 25th? Maybe, what day is... Less than 2 weeks' time, our annual income drops by over £11,000 a year immediately. Because you're apparently no longer autistic or have hypermobility.
Yeah, they found a cure. I just hope they'll share it with us.
I mean, we've been through the initial shock of that. There was a day or two where it was just like, what the fuck are we going to do? I think coming out of it, there's not a lot you can do. I mean, obviously we're going to be going through citizens' advice and stuff because we're still fighting Star Stuff's case, aren't we? She got a bit of standard mobility for her severe pain issues, but...
Although it's less than I get just for being at school with my education maintenance allowance.
Yeah, I mean, that amount that we've dropped, our income has dropped, is basically... It is a total of carers allowance, the Scottish carers allowance supplement, your disability living allowance, which you've had since you were 7, and... the disability component of tax credits. So it's not all like one thing, but that's the total that kind of is taken away. So anyway, I'm going out and prostituting myself as a piano teacher very shortly. Haven't started quite yet, but...
I mean, given that you're likely going to be working with some children, I wouldn't describe it as that.
Describe it as what?
Prostituting yourself.
Yeah, don't say that. I haven't got my disclosure yet. Let's move on.
Oh, really? No, let's stay on this. Any other...
No, in the same way that Freddie Mercury spoke of himself as a musical prostitute. Mm-hmm. But perhaps not with the same behavioural traits. Let's move on. Jolly quickly.
Right. Any other news that you can think of?
I don't know, really. Not.
Ooh. Other thing that I've been paying some attention to is, I mean, it's not a primary, because...
the caucuses?
Yeah. Well,
Iowa.
Iowa has a caucus. Most other places have a primary. Now, how a caucus works is fucking insane. Basically,
for some reason I always think of chickens.
Okay.
Is it not something to do with farmyard animals caucuses?
I don't know. It might make sense once I explain it. Basically, in each precinct, they have areas on the floor that represent each candidate, and people go stand in those areas.
Yeah.
And then people from the other areas have to try and convince other people to their area. Except somehow Bernie Sanders got significantly more votes than the guy in second place votes.
So basically, just have to like sort of shout across the room at each other, or
probably, I don't know. It sounds fucking insane compared to just casting a vote. That seems way simpler.
Yeah. Oh, that was one thing though. Sorry, going back to sorry, I've interrupted your American news, but it reminded me of something that happened with the NHS funding votes in Parliament,
Right.
which are I don't know exactly sure what the thing is, but the Barnett consequentials, which is something to do with funding because Scotland's funding for various things is devolved, but there are aspects of England's funding, like for instance the NHS, which is what this was about. There are aspects of England's funding processes which affect the Scottish funding of their own NHS. So it might seem reasonable to start with, but the under the Barnett formula, there's apparently Scottish MPs can vote on English funding things like the NHS because of the way
doesn't have a devolved parliament of its own.
Yeah, and also because the way that the votes go and those does affect the Scottish funding as well. So, but there was a vote on something to do with NHS funding last week where they decided they were going to put a sign up on the door that's just said England to keep the Scottish MPs out of the vote. And
does it affect England and Wales though?
I'm not sure because there's a different level of devolution there, isn't there?
They do have a devolved parliament, but most of the laws are England and Wales rather than just England.
But this sign on the door just said England, and the Scottish MPs who defied that and went in to vote anyway, as they're legally allowed to do, had their votes discounted. So
I mean, it's just sort of like, it feels like a lot of people can break the rules, and because they're the ones that get to decide what the rules are, basically, even though they've not had any official way to change them.
These rules are supposed to be agreed by the whole of Parliament, not just by...
Yeah, but basically because they've got a significant majority, that isn't going away anytime soon, unless there's something really big that most Tory MPs, like there's a split in the Tory party about, and that the whip can't control them. But with a majority this big, that's very unlikely.
Anyway, I mean, so moving on to the subject anyway, because all of you were talking about caucuses, weren't you?
Somehow Bernie Sanders got more votes, but there's this weird thing about state delegate equivalents, which I'm not sure how that works, that were calculated in a weird way. And then the results got released when it was about like 70-something% done, and it was showing quite a underdog Pete. I'm not even sure how to pronounce his last name, and I literally only heard him speak for the first time when he was announcing his victory after not all the votes had been counted, and Bernie Sanders had more voice. No, he just had the most boring voice.
You know, when you haven't heard anyone speak and then they open your mouth and you want them to just be like, hello, or something. Anyway.
Pete Buttigieg. I don't know.
Are you okay?
Buttigieg. No.
Buttigieg.
I don't know how to pronounce it. So there's a weird thing with that. He announced his victory early, but even then, I don't know. I mean, it's only now narrowly that he has more state delegate equivalents, whatever the fuck that means, more than Bernie Sanders. I'm not sure, maybe, because I've only seen them at 99% recently, which means that this still could change who's in the lead there. So Pete Buttigieg gets 13 delegates with 25% of the vote, yet Bernie Sanders gets 12 delegates with 26.6% of the votes. I don't understand how that works.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
It hasn't put what their state delegate equivalents are here, but
I've never really understood American electoral politics. Still really don't get the relationship. But I suppose it's a similar kind of thing. I do have my head around, to a certain extent, the difference between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So I suppose that's a similar thing to other people who don't have an inside kind of view on it. I don't really understand the Senate and the, what is it, the House, what is it in America? There's the Senate and
the House of Representatives.
House of Representatives, yeah.
The House of Representatives is
you're going to explain it to me now.
Proportional to the whole of the US. So, like, the amount of representatives per state is more proportional, although it's still not completely proportional because there's a minimum of 3, I think, per state, which means like a tiny state like Wyoming, someone there has 3 times the voting power as someone in California.
Yeah.
But the Senate's wildly unproportional because there's only 2 delegates per state, which means the Republicans, which control a lot of states but not as many people, have more power there.
Yeah.
Which means something like the impeachment acquittal, the people that voted for impeaching in the Senate were representing 19 million more people than the ones that didn't.
Yeah.
But America's somehow more fucked up than the UK system, and the UK system's pretty fucked up itself.
Indeed.
There are quite clear ways to make these systems more proportional. It's just they don't benefit the ones currently in power.
So they can't get them through, or, it's kind of...
A country that does actually have quite proportional representation, it has something called single transferable vote, which I believe I explained to you, where you do the numbers, but several candidates get elected per seat, constituency, whatever.
Yeah.
In Ireland, the top 3 parties are polling within 0.2% of one another.
All right, okay.
So all hell could be about to break loose. One of which is Sinn Féin.
Yeah, well...
But to be honest, I mean, I don't know enough about Irish history to really make accurate comment on how the Troubles really relate to current politics. So with relation to that, given that, at least in Northern Ireland, both sides had some involvement
it's going to be a very interesting 12 months, isn't it? Or, 11 months now.
Yeah.
Leading up to and slightly beyond, I suppose. Well, it's just... Nobody really knows. I mean, in some ways they've been looking for... Well, business has been looking for some kind of certainty, but it's like, I'm not quite sure whether what we've got now constitutes certainty. I mean, it is certainty in the sense that we are leaving the European Union, but...
Well, they basically said,
it's kind of put everything else on the line.
They said, we won't have close arrangement with the EU, so you'll just have to deal with that. And then, at some other point, they said, oh, wait, no, we will. So, don't get worried. We're just saying that to keep people happy. So it's a bit of a mixed message. Yeah.
And I think that one of the big difficulties now is that I think so many people have had enough of the whole kind of trying to get Brexit through malarkey that they just want to sit back now and let it happen. Now that we've actually got past the point where Article 50's been sort of followed through on, the withdrawal bill's gone through. It's a dangerous time because a lot of people now will be wanting to just say, right, well, let's just get on with it and forget about it and let them get on with it and do it. And
yeah, well, basically all I've heard since from Brexiteers is, oh no, let's just all come together and get through this. It's just like, you voted for this and you continue to defend it even though it was clear that this wasn't going to work. Like, fair enough when you're willing to admit you're wrong. Like, I'm not going to hold a grudge against anyone that voted for it because there's a lot of money trying to convince those people.
Yeah.
But
Speaking of which, I can't remember how much it is they've spent. Tories are spending on 5 million on an anti-Scottish independence ad campaign.
Probably, I don't know.
Yeah, which seems an awful lot to spend on something which you've already said you're not going to allow happen.
Yeah, it feels like they're readying for that to happen, regardless if they let it or not.
Yeah.
It seems like a sort of, I don't know. It
seems like an acknowledgement that it's a danger.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I think it's just no prime minister wants to be the one that is in charge when that happens, and I think it's inevitable that it will happen at some point. It's just a matter of in what time frame.
Yeah.
Just one more thing from the Iowa caucus. In quite a surprising thing, Joe Biden, who I think a lot of other people thought would be either the most popular or second to Bernie Sanders, actually came in fourth in the Iowa caucuses.
All right.
Now, I am wondering if there's some relation to the whole impeachment process. Because
possibly.
It was, what that was over is him getting investigated by Ukrainian government.
See, with that impeachment thing, it doesn't seem to me as though anyone on the defence side are saying that the things he was accused of aren't true. It's just that they're saying that. It seems like they're saying that's fine. That's not a problem. What he's done isn't a problem.
Well, I think they did start out with that, but at some point the evidence got so overwhelming they're just like, "Oh yeah, he did it." But like,
is it really such a big thing?
It's just a hassle. We're near an election, and some of them have started using it like as, "Oh, it's in the national interest. We don't care if he actually committed a crime, and it's totally impeachable, but it's better for the country. Therefore, it's not a crime anymore."
Yeah, so at what point does it become better for the country to just submit to dictatorship?
Well, basically, they believe that Trump being in charge is the best thing for the US.
Yeah.
So anything.
Some of the interviews that you see with some of the general public over there, though, on things like what was it? The Today Show,
the Daily Show.
Daily Show, sorry. It's just like
they had a guy interviewing them and asked them a bunch of questions, basically leading up to them getting themselves in a trap where, like he'd said about John Bolton, who was Trump's national security advisor, testifying. So, like, what would be the issue in him testifying?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, he might lie and he has, like, personal vendetta against Trump because he was fired. It's like, oh, well, if only we had a system in charge to make sure people don't lie under oath.
Yeah. They just don't seem to care whether or not it's legal what he's doing. It's just like, well, you know,
it's just sort of like
he's in charge, and
but he's our side. We have to support him.
Yeah, just let him do whatever he wants to do, basically.
But I genuinely think if he does win this election, that it's going to become a case where he's going to run out of people that are willing to put up with his bullshit. I mean, there's still
either
lot
that,
of
or
places.
I could see him if he gets in again, getting rid of the 2-term situation.
Well, he has, in a scary way, sort of hinted at that. He hasn't said that he definitely would, but he's put. He basically had like a video that. Weirdly to music, The Hall of the Mountain King.
Grieg.
Yes. With Trump 2028, Trump 2032, continuing on into infinity.
Is that not...
It seems like that must just be him trolling
That's not
people.
fair. That's taking... Because that's the Alton Towers music.
Yeah, but it just seems weird that he would put that on it himself, because that seems like a song that's meant to sort of denote chaos and...
I'm moving on to the Islay single malt Scotch whiskey now.
It's kind of a bit of a sinister thing, isn't it?
What?
Well, like sinister, but like in a silly way.
Yeah. it's kind of mischievous, kind of. It's got that Alton Towers feel to it, hasn't it?
Like,
That's
I feel
right,
like
kind of-
he must just be trolling people with that, but it is worrying that I think he genuinely would want to do that.
That is quite amusing though, because I'm pretty sure isn't the Mountain King a troll?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know, it might have been because I know The Economist did an article on how Trumpism will continue after he's out of office. Because, well, we've seen it over here. The Tories have largely mirrored some of the... not to the same extent, but they've done that sort of thing of doing ridiculous things that break the rules and just with enough bullheaded confidence that...
But it's chipping away, isn't it? It's chipping away until the point where you kind of... It is kind of, well, the rules don't really matter. We have the power.
Yeah.
You've given us the power. You've let us use that power. Now we're going to wield it, basically. I think we should be moving on because we're over 50 minutes in.
Well, that's not including the bollocks at the start.
What do you mean the bollocks at the start?
Right. The topic of today's podcast is extremism.
It's what?
Extremism.
Extremism.
Yes.
Don't know whether I should let you have that second beer. It is a school night. But I'm on the whiskey already, so... There you go.
I'm probably getting drunk off the fumes of those and the beer itself.
Extremism. Okay, so what is extremism, Firebolt?
Well, that's the thing.
Is it?
See, I feel like it's often used as something to shut down ideas that just differ from the norm. Like, it's quite a negative term to call
I was going to say,
extreme.
Is it... I mean, it's perceived as negative on the whole, but is it always, do you think, a bad thing? What is labelled as extremism? For instance, gluing yourself to the doors of an oil company or occupying an oil rig, or...
There is that, but it's sort of... Those actions are in proportion to a very extreme problem that has put us on the verge of a sixth mass extinction.
The thing is, for me, I think it's a sliding scale of activism. But I think if you apply it too liberally, you kind of water down its meaning, because obviously something like the Twin Towers attack is clearly what the vast majority of people would see as extremist, and terrorist bombings, suicide bombings, all that sort of thing, you would see as extremist actions. But when you start talking about peaceful protesters as extremists...
I think that's the thing, though.
What do you then call the suicide bombers? Extremists?
Yeah, well, I think that's the idea.
To label
just
them as the
sort
same
of,
thing.
if someone doesn't like what you're doing...
Basically
to try
anything
and
that
change.
causes disruption.
Yeah. But it's like...
So
on that point, I don't know if I've mentioned this in a podcast. I think it's in the east of England. Leaflets were issued to teachers that had Extinction Rebellion next to...
See, it seems to me like
Islamic extremist groups.
It seems to me like it's a slippery slope towards labelling anyone who doesn't conform as an extremist.
Yeah.
Which is really, it's a really right-wing concept, that, isn't it?
Well, that's the point. Because, see, the thing is with a lot of Western democracies is that the political spectrum really right shifted, where someone like UKIP, which in any reasonable system would seem really extreme, it's just sort of slightly more right wing than we're used to now.
Yeah.
Or maybe not UKIP, but the Brexit Party, because UKIP has actually gone more extreme towards Tommy Robinson and stuff.
But I mean, there is that feeling at the moment, which is fairly widespread, that the Conservative Party, since they've got this large majority now, are perceived as being or potentially becoming more and more right wing. I mean, obviously, it's a lot less in that conservative camp to tolerate things like strikes.
Yeah.
So basically, any form of protest, any form of disrespect for authority, it is a very Orwellian trait, isn't it?
I mean, it's just authoritarianism. I think Orwellian's used a bit.
Have you read 1984?
No, but I have seen analysis of what it actually means to be Orwellian, like that, specifically that doublespeak thing, which definitely the Tories are guilty
I know
of.
Yeah, I know that's often used for that, but the book itself is more about conformity and being put through facing their worst fears because of not following the party line, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, I first read that when I was much younger. I wouldn't want to guess, but probably in the 1980s. And the idea of a screen on the wall, which could be watching, which you get sort of broadcasts through, but could also be watching you at any time without you knowing, is kind of, I mean, we're doing it now.
Right.
We have two screens in front of us now that could be somebody could be watching us through that. I mean, yeah, we're recording, but you know, there are webcams on.
I think, mass surveillance is another prominent trait to do with Orwellianism, I guess.
And that is something that I have read something just today actually about it was an article talking about the effectiveness of the independence marches up here and whether or not Scotland should be looking at taking more direct action and going to London and having independence marches in London because they would be noticed. And there's a lot of controversy about whether or not it's a good idea because obviously the English Defence League would probably get involved. There'd be sort of counter protests and stuff. It could turn nasty. But the other thing is that it's acknowledging Westminster's power in the same way that Sinn Féin doesn't want to take their seats in Westminster. But it was also one of the points that was being made for it was that if you go, because somebody was mentioned in the article who had been on the Independence March in Glasgow last month, and they'd been talking to a friend of theirs who lived just south of the border in England, and saying about they were going on this Independence March, and this person had said, "Oh, how many people turn up to that? A couple of men and their dog," kind of thing, and they were quite surprised when that person turned around and said, "Well, no, there's 100,000 people," and the person from just south of the border in England was like, "We don't hear anything about this down here. We don't, there's no coverage of that down here."
Well, there's not a huge amount of coverage up here.
But there's more.
Like, you specifically follow these things, but, like, other than that, like, I don't get a lot of specifically Scottish news.
So their point was that if you got, like, tens of thousands of people marching through London, Londoners would be faced with that. And there's already a lot of discontent among people in built-up areas in England, but London especially, about the amount of mass surveillance there is there, and the whole kind of way of life, I suppose. So it doesn't take much for them to then get behind the idea that, well, if they want independence, give it to them, because
I mean, I have genuinely seen some things about the possibility of London becoming an independent city-state, which, I mean, whilst it seems ridiculous, isn't entirely impossible, but it doesn't feel like there's actually a movement for that right now.
No.
It's just sort of based on their difference to a lot of England.
What do you think of hunger striking? Is that a form of extremism?
Well, here's the thing. Extremism, which is sort of co-opted into terrorism, even if it isn't like an act of terror. So something like the suffragettes would have been seen as extremists. The suffragists less so. I don't know if you know much about that. The suffragists were more about trying to change things by being civil and polite to these people rather than chaining themselves to government buildings. And
well, I mean, that is supposed to be the essence of Extinction Rebellion's movement, is civil disobedience.
Well,
do you mean
civil in a different way?
So civil as in terms of like campaigning in a positive way to achieve change and
more like being sort of
asking for things rather than demanding them.
Yeah. But definitely, I mean, the sort of people that would call Extinction Rebellion extreme, like, they clearly aren't fans of history, given the history of protest even in the UK.
Well, this makes me think
the rest of the world.
Is there this watering down of the word extremism? Do some people now? Do you think is it approaching the point where some people now see anything which is beyond what most people would be comfortable doing is extremism?
Maybe.
Like, I mean, when does it become extremism to write to your MP about something? Because most people don't bother.
But it's like, that's not really a very extreme action. That's.
Would you say, because we went to the
that's like part of our established process for changing things.
I've been to two protests in my life. I think one was, I think you were there as well, but you won't remember it because I think you were in a pram. The Make Poverty History March.
I don't remember. That
was years and years ago. There was. There were marches all over the world about it.
Look how that turned out.
Yeah. But I mean, things like that and the climate change thing that we went to, Student Climate Change Network thing that we went to in Aberdeen, would you call that extremism?
No. But
what tips it into extremism? What step would make it extremism for you? Because some people would see that as extremism, wouldn't they?
Idiots, but I don't think most mainstream people would consider something like that extreme.
Right.
But say, like a very contained protest where there's just speeches and people chanting, that's fairly within the purview of the British norm, I think.
So far.
But something like Extinction Rebellion, blocking roads...
Right.
Storming airports.
Yeah. But see, when you say storming, what does that mean?
Well, just turning up en masse at an airport to try and make the people that use that airport's lives more difficult, but also because most of the people that use that particular airport were rich businessmen. And
I can see that happening more because the airline industry have got a big problem on their hands with the climate change thing, because they are one of the biggest kind of offenders, if you like, and also while things like electric cars and that aren't taking off as quickly as they could be, there is a solution there that we could be implementing quicker. But with the airline industry, the technological development just isn't happening quick enough.
Yeah, well, a good example of where the word extremism is used quite often and very incorrectly is the Green New Deal. Have you heard of this?
I've heard of it. I'm not quite sure exactly what it is.
I mean, basically, it was a bill proposed to Congress in the US. Other versions have been proposed around the world. And it's a term that's being used a lot. I've seen it from our Green Party here, to describe what sort of action we'd need to take to make the UK actually decent for the environment. The bill didn't actually get very far. I mean, the first step of it was just acknowledging the scale of the problem, but also acknowledging at the same time that in order to address that, we also need to be aware of the sorts of communities that would have previously relied on fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Or particular job markets that aren't good for the environment, but we need to compensate them.
See, this brings to mind a job ad, or a news article that a friend of mine shared, who works in the oil industry locally, and a lot of people do around here, the ones that have still got jobs. Basically saying that the industries, the subsea industry, is potentially going to recover a bit from its loss of jobs, that there are more jobs being created now, and that the local business environment could prosper. And I, on the surface, I thought to myself, I mean, yeah, that's great, but at the same time, it's the environment. We can't really afford to be.
Yeah.
But then I read further into the article, and apparently a lot of the subsea stuff that's going to be going on is to do with development of renewables, like wind farms and, you know, all that sort of stuff.
I mean, it's something, but it's sort of like, okay, but you could just stop doing the other stuff, and
I think the oil companies
be a much greater effect.
Some of the oil companies and the oil industry partner companies are realizing that's the way they're going to have to go, because the thing is, it's not happening quickly enough, and nothing would be quickly enough because it's already too late to.
Well, that's the thing. If we
stop a lot of what's already happening,
this process a lot earlier, say when the warning signs were first being raised by the likes of Al Gore.
But I did notice one thing in the news this week, this week or the week before, which I think it's not good enough still, but I think it's another step in the right direction, and I think it could possibly lead to further steps in the right direction. Is that the UK are banning the sale of petrol and diesel cars after 2035.
It's too late.
I know it's too late, but I can't see them. I mean, the initial response to that from environmental groups is it should be at least, it should be brought forward to at least 2030 and preferably 2025. Now, 2025's a very difficult thing to achieve. I think it's necessary, but at the same time, I think I wouldn't be surprised if they're pushed to and agree to bringing that forward to 2030.
Yeah, I mean, most of these things are sort of, our government, as much as I hate them, is better than a lot of other governments with this. But that's sort of like, okay, that's still shite.
Mm. And I think that, this argument about, India and China are doing a lot of this polluting and what have you.
But that's the thing, like, per capita, India, I think, is on a similar level to us.
Yeah.
And per capita, China's better than the US.
I think we have a responsibility in the West to help them develop without the reliance on these fossil fuels that we took advantage of, because it was us that developed it, and it was us that have benefited the most from it. So we can't now turn around and stop them from their development phase from enjoying the same benefits without helping them somehow to develop in the right direction.
I mean, because Trump's basically stripped all funding for renewable energy as much as he can, China's now the biggest developer of renewable energy sources.
He's such a wanker.
Because it's gotten to a point where that's actually cheaper than doing the fossil fuels. So the Chinese government will just commission solar plants instead.
Yeah. It's like America's got like great swathes, and Australia as well. I mean, they've got no excuse. Most of their country's uninhabited. They could just coat the place in solar panels.
Well, that's, I think, I think it was Elon Musk trying to do lithium-ion batteries down there,
Right.
which they're seeing as. I'm not particularly sure what they do specifically, but that's one of the emergent technologies for renewable energy sources.
No, rechargeable batteries are a lot of rechargeable batteries are lithium ion, aren't they?
I don't know.
Don't know if they're specifically higher capacity or faster charging or anything like that, but
Yeah, in America, something like the Green New Deal's seen as extreme, even though it's a fairly basic step to stopping global warming, basically. Like, that's the first step, and they can't handle that. And I don't think our government would like it either. Because it includes a lot of, I guess, more socialistic policies that would acknowledge that people need help to deal with this. Regardless if we address it, we need to be better at preparing for this.
I find it quite difficult to reconcile the general view of what extremism is in terms of, domestically we think of it in terms of terrorists bombing places or, violence. And yet at the same time, those not exact same, but similar kind of violence-based tactics are used in so-called legal ways in international wars.
When
is it legal to bomb somewhere?
When you're a government or contracted by the government.
But it's still extremism.
Well,
they might not call it that, but it's still extremism. If you go bombing places, you are committing extreme acts. Whether or not they're legally sanctioned is irrelevant. They're still pretty extreme acts.
But whoever writes the history books decides that, basically. Or whoever's reporting on that decides that, and these things aren't very often actually reported on.
But that's a problem for the future to deal with. As we stand in the present, they're trying to paint the present as the history they're writing. Do you know what I mean? They're labelling the extremists before we've seen who came out victorious. I mean, let's say, for instance, if the whole war against capitalism and Islam spread across the world and basically the whole world became dominated by Islam, would the extremists then historically not be labelled as the capitalists that went bombing Middle Eastern countries?
I think they probably would be seen as extremists in the history books, but I doubt that would be a result of Islam taking over the world, because that's very unlikely given its current.
Yeah, I know. It was a hypothetical. Anything that could defeat capitalism, and you tend to think of extremism as being a physical act, don't you?
Well, I think most people would, but then they'd probably happily call a lot of things extremism that have nothing to do with hurting anyone. It's about
what, like
people wanting... No, not... Well, some people, some twats would. People campaigning for radical change to the system, that's another thing, radicalism. But I think radical's been, other than its colloquial use in the 90s...
Yeah, that almost became complimentary, didn't it?
Is a sort of... It's a more positive thing, because I've seen a lot of politicians using that of, oh, we need radical change, rather than just, oh, I'm radical.
Yeah.
So it's sort of admitting, well, if you're going to call me radical, then yeah, but that's only because the situation's this extreme that we need to change it that much.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing with the US system as well, a lot of the mainstream Democrats are probably more, slightly more right-wing than our conservatives.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that's how far... It's that Overton window thing.
Yeah.
Where someone more extreme on one side of it will shift it towards them, even if they're not within it.
I do find it interesting or strange sometimes watching some of the films that come out of Hollywood that are portraying the political state of division in America, because it does in some ways seem quite foreign. While we do have racism problems, I don't think, depending on where you are in America, I suppose, but there are a lot of places in America that seem to have real problems with it. Like, compared to what we have, with us, it's almost like casual racism is the biggest problem here. You get the odd
it's
extreme
like
kind of
diet
of that,
racism.
but it's more people just like being insulting and derogatory to people of race, rather than actually treating them like subhuman, kind of.
I guess, but it's more sort of not realising that there's a lot of bias, particularly in our media, towards people of colour.
In some ways, that could be more. Do you think that could be more potentially damaging, because it's almost like it's pervasive? It's kind of, it's under the radar. It's at least if police are actually shooting blacks in the street, at least that's obvious. Do you know what I mean? It's like clear that there's something wrong going on there. Whereas
like in America,
biased is.
I mean, it was recently the anniversary of Trayvon Martin being shot by, I think the guy that shot him wasn't actually even a police officer. He was part of like some neighborhood watch.
I don't suppose that's been referred to in a film recently, has it? I went to see Queen and Slim last week, which was about a cop who accidentally gets shot by a black guy that he stopped at the side of the road, but almost in self-defense. And it turns out that this cop had actually shot another black guy for pretty much no reason recently as well. And it's I'm not sure if it's based on real life events.
It wouldn't be that. Trayvon Martin was a kid.
Oh, right, okay.
He, as far as I can tell, basically did nothing, but that didn't stop the guy that shot him suing the parents for making the accusation that their kid hadn't actually done anything.
Sorry, I just spelt single malt on your laptop.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people still, years later, seeming to think that these kids were at fault here. I mean, I just don't see. I mean, it's a really weird thing over here because our police barely ever use guns. We have some armed police that you might see around tube stations and airports, but
I remember that being strange because I was working at the airport. I think it must have been, was it 2007? They had the London bombings.
Yeah.
I was working at the airport at the time, and I remember them.
Or something.
I remember them introducing the police patrolling at the airport with visible guns, and at that time it seemed it was quite a big change because you'd never have seen that before.
Yeah, I mean, like whilst I was down in London around about New Year, I've gotten a bit more used to it, but it still feels really weird seeing people around a train station carrying like proper assault rifle weaponry rather than just like a pistol or something.
Well, even that, they wouldn't have had that,
No. Well, yeah.
I'm used to the era where it was basically they had a baton in their belt.
I think the last time that our police actually shot someone, because they very rarely use their guns, and that's mostly for target practice, was the start of the London riots in 2012.
Was was he Mexican? There was an electrician that got...
don't think so.
No, it was possibly just around about the same time, but...
Mark Duggan, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember the name now. Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't really aware of what was going on then because I was 9, so...
Yeah.
But yeah, the last time that happened, it sparked mass riots. Some of that was to do with that. Some of it was just people going, "Oh look, there's a fight here. Let's go smash it up and steal stuff."
But see, it only takes something like that. If there's general kind of dissatisfaction bubbling under the surface, it doesn't take much to release that, to give a catalyst for it to boil over. And then once it does, because I remember that spreading, and it's just like happening in one area, and then it would start popping up in different areas, and you'd get like copycat protests going on, and eventually it just became that was when Boris Johnson was mayor, wasn't it? London mayor, and he bought a load of water cannon,
even though it was illegal to use them.
Yeah,
I think partially due to EU rules.
Yeah, which is funny because they used them in Brussels against the Extinction Rebellion protesters.
Oh, they might have been UK rules then. See, that's the thing with half of these things that they complain about. It's like the UK made these rules or voted for them in the European Parliament. So it's sort of like the problem is with the UK system, not with the EU system.
Yeah,
that's why our country is the way it is.
It's always more beneficial to the powers here to blame someone else, because then you can paint yourself as the saviour.
The starting of every fascist leadership.
Yeah.
But the EU's more democratic in almost every single way.
The thing is, I mean, do you think... See, that, as you say about it, that being the start of every fascist leadership, do you think that's as... It's scary that it could be that possible in a world of such openness in an information sense now? I mean, you can see how it could have happened in the early 20th century, because...
I believe more recently to do with like this targeted advertisement thing, it's been coined as techno-fascism.
Right. Because in some ways you'd think with that availability of information,
which sounds
happen,
like...
But at the same time, well, actually, you could spread disinformation a lot quicker now.
Well, that's basically what's happening. It just sounds like a name for a metal band.
Yeah, I'm thinking German underground clubs with PVC and leads and collars.
Well, please don't think it's
S&M and...
No, shut the fuck up.
GIMP masks.
I can't just...
Is there such a thing as sexual extremism? Sextremism?
Yes.
What would you call that? You have an example of that?
What?
2 girls.
No. Although I have seen it from documentaries.
Oh, sorry.
Talking about how porn stars, because of the way that that's been very much digitized, to basically make a living once they turn a certain age and they aren't as profitable, or in this sort of midpoint between looking young enough to be considered a teenager and not looking old enough to be considered a MILF.
Right.
Like somewhere between that. They have to turn to doing more extreme things.
Okay.
Like face sitting and other things. Yeah, that's a weird thing. In the UK, it's illegal to show female orgasms in pornography. I mean, I'm pretty sure that doesn't stop people, but...
That's so unenforceable, though.
Yeah, well, they tried to do it, I think, July last year.
Did they not try to ban fisting as well? Like
they have, but like it doesn't work.
How do you stop that when it's, there's so much of our porn comes from overseas anyway?
Yeah, well,
I mean, without actually like isolating the country's internet and turning it into like North Korea, then
yeah, I mean the last they can put censors on that sort of stuff and like flag it up, but like it does get into a territory where if you start restricting parts of the internet like that, it's getting towards what China does.
But
they have an entirely different browser.
Don't you feel that that's quite revealing of general public opinion? Because if they aren't able to successfully and comfortably restrict that sort of stuff, it's because the public want access to that sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah, naturally. I mean, I think it's among the most visited websites, Pornhub.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing with British society in particular. I mean, I think in other countries in Europe, they're more open about this.
Yeah.
Where, like, almost everyone's watching porn. It's just very few people want to actually talk about it.
There are one or two characters that you know that will deliberately kind of bring something pretty extreme up on their phone and show it around their kind of peer group, if you like, just to almost like a kudos thing. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I think I don't know.
But you've got to be careful with stuff like that because I mean, you know, I've seen people show their phone around with stuff that is technically illegal, like bestiality and stuff, and you're like, people must get in trouble for that when they're just. It's almost like they're just kind of showing off. Do you know what I mean?
You're with friends.
Have you? Yeah, but I suppose you're only 17, aren't you? But
I don't know. I mean, like, I think I'm pretty open in that sense. Like, I'll talk quite openly about that sort of stuff just to see, like, how people react to it because I find it funny.
Yeah,
and
but
also
I know
it's sort
people
of
who
half a
will
defense
like,
mechanism.
you know, if you're playing in a band with somebody and they're at a gig and they'll like sort of show something quite shocking around. It's almost like for the shock factor.
Oh, definitely.
But at the same time, that's like an extreme form of porn, if you like. But how do these places get away with it though? Because it's like, I mean, there's obvious exceptions where in the vast majority of the world, certain aspects are very much illegal. But things like, for instance, I mentioned bestiality. There seems to be a lot less of a problem with that than there is for, say, underage stuff.
Well, I don't know.
Even though it's just as illegal.
Well, like, the act itself, but I don't know if, like, the production of pornography with it is that illegal or watching it's that illegal.
But you see like at the beginning of legal porn, you see like a disclaimer saying that all the people in it are certified as over 18 or whatever, and the records are available. I would think, and but you can't do that with a horse.
I mean, it's probably taken from things that like aren't that real.
What, like
it might have been photoshopped, whatever.
A pretend horse?
Not that. Or it might be like from news stories. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, shall we move on? And be awfully British. Sweep it under the carpet.
Not British, we're Scottish.
Sorry. I have actually started putting in I'm doing a lot of work at the moment on sort of shaking up our web hosting area because things are changing so much, moving websites about and stuff. And part of that is to put in the company address details. And I have started putting Scotland instead of United Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of extremism, relatively minor bits of like social democracy, which is fairly centre-left. What are you going to say?
I don't know why, but it just, because we were talking about bestiality and then we moved on to Scotland, it reminded me of a scene in a film that I watched at the cinema today.
Explain quickly.
Would you believe me if I said that? And I'm trying not to, I don't want to be okay, spoiler alert. Don't listen for the next minute or so if you want to see Doolittle without any spoilers.
That's a U, isn't it?
It's a PG. But there is a...
Explain.
Would you believe there is a point in that where Robert Downey Jr. pulls a set of bagpipes out of a dragon's arse?
Were you on acid whilst watching this film?
No, it happens.
Right. Does it make a noise?
I can't really remember. What, the dragon?
No, the bagpipes.
Possibly. But yeah, no, it's a blockage, and he removes it because he's a vet, isn't he? He's an animal doctor.
I don't know. Wasn't that
Dr. Doolittle? Yeah.
Yes.
And he has his elbow deep in a dragon's arse and pulls out a set of bagpipes.
Okay then.
Which is interesting.
I'm sure it was. Ooh, a point on talking about the rise of fascism in our modern time. Contrasting to Jojo Rabbit.
That was good.
Without giving too much away, it basically goes through... I mean, it's actually towards the end of the war, so the Nazis are on the back foot, but there's still this air of propaganda. Most people around don't really know that unless they're actually part of that system.
And I suppose there's always that fear that if things do tip in the Germans' favour, they don't want to end up on the wrong side.
Yeah.
Did you feel, when I was watching that, it probably isn't, but I felt almost as that it looked to me like some of that might have been filmed in Tallinn. Some of the outdoor stuff. But it's probably just because it's got that kind of Eastern European kind of architecture.
I mean, I think it's set in Austria, so...
Yeah.
It might just... I don't remember particularly huge amount. Yeah. Set in a town in Austria. But the only people that really know that much about what's going on are people with access to intel that would give them that. So, like, there's someone that's lost their eye and so can't serve in the German military.
That's the thing,
anymore.
isn't it? Because the general public aren't aware of how close things are. And I suppose that must be why things like the collapse of the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall coming down must have been such a big thing for those that were behind it. Because at that point,
like on the other side of it, like you and many other people wouldn't know fuck all about what was going on.
No.
USSR.
No.
Or other
only
places.
Only what I'm reluctant to label as Western propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of that general air of, it's very sinister, they're the bad guys.
I do know that back in the 80s, it used to be quite regularly, quite openly said that if you...
the camera's just gone.
If you were going to take a trip to Moscow, that you should pack like 10 pairs of jeans at least to sell them over there, because you could get a lot of money for jeans over there.
Right.
And I think that kind of attitude of it being, that they can't get basic things that we think of as as basics are kind of luxuries to them.
Yeah, there was something about that. The USSR wanted Pepsi. I'm not sure if it was for use in their military, because I think there was someone like quite high up that was a fan of that, but they couldn't actually get it over there. So for a short amount of time, because the USSR didn't actually have any money to pay them, Pepsi had, I think, the 6th largest fleet in the world.
All right.
Because they paid them in ships that were like disused.
Yeah.
And I think it was towards like the end, so they were running out of other things that they could have paid them with.
But I remember sort of having a vague idea that there were queues around the block at bakeries to get loaves of bread, and supermarkets with empty shelves and stuff like that. And you think,
to be fair, like
that's only what we saw from this side of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's...
I mean, it was far worse before the revolution, though.
Right.
Because the Tsars kept it instead.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a far more, I guess, senseless power structure. I don't know.
I mean, that reminds me. That makes me think of... I know it's fiction, but watching Dolittle today, there's a bit that's in Buckingham Palace, and, just like in the Queen's bedroom, or it just generally in Buckingham Palace in general, and you're like... Yeah, it just doesn't... I don't understand the inequality that, there's people living in the lap of luxury, some through their own kind of work,
I mean,
what they've earned, but just to have some people like with gold leaf around their decor and solid gold artifacts lying around their bedroom and stuff, and yet other people can't afford to eat. I don't know how we tolerate that.
There's that aspect of it, but there's also a sort of more social inequality there, where these people, or like even legal inequality. I mean, the Queen can literally get away with murder in most of the world.
Yeah. I did. There was a serious suggestion made that we should swap Prince Andrew, is it, for the woman that ran over that kid in America. Not in America, she ran over the kid here and went back to America, but she's got diplomatic immunity. And there was a suggestion that we should swap them.
Yeah, well, they've actually joined forces, those campaigns to...
All right.
Get those people prosecuted have joined forces.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it seems even more weird because, the royal family in itself is a bubble of its own, but like how the press has acted towards Meghan Markle and Prince Harry,
that's just ridiculous.
There's a very good evidence to suggest that a member of the royal family is a paedophile.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just blatant racism, isn't it, really?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's not that blatant, at least to a lot of people. Like, if you're paying attention, then yes, definitely, it's quite clear.
It's not that difficult when someone points it out to see.
Or unless you've already convinced that certain people are trying to convince you of this for whatever reason. I did see a funny thing in relation to that. I think Stormzy was asked whether there was racism in the UK.
Yeah.
And he said, yes, definitely, 100%. And they reported that as basically saying the UK is 100% racist.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
Do you think, going back to extremism in terms of terrorism, do you think we are potentially at a greater risk in the coming months and years because of Trump's policy in the Middle East? Do you think we're going to see a resurfacing of things like ISIS and what was the one at the time? The Taliban were around.
Well, they were basically the government of Afghanistan for a while.
Yeah. What was the name of that organisation that
Al Qaeda?
That's the one. They were responsible for Twin Towers, weren't they?
Yeah.
But then you see that you then see the pictures of the jubilant crowds when they saw the footage of the Twin Towers coming down, and I'm not sure how I feel about that, because the way it's reported, it's almost like the Western media, certainly in America, seem to be trying to paint the Middle East as terrorists.
Well, I would be very wary of that in the first place. Well, because I don't know if you can accurately verify that what that crowd reacting to is reacting to 9/11.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Because it could just be any old footage of a crowd cheering. Because I think people have been caught out on that before, where people know what they're cheering about.
Yeah.
And it's something entirely different. That's, although we might not agree with, it's relatively
maybe the real
benign.
Extremists are the media.
Well, that's the thing. They're the norm. Using extremism as a bad term or any indicator of how extreme something like should feel isn't helpful. Because extreme is away from the status quo, and the status quo might seem extreme to any reasonable,
but it's got to be away from it to a certain extent, surely. Because I mean, you can be a bit eccentric, but you're not necessarily extremist. But you know, you're not necessarily the norm. But you've got to cross a certain boundary before you get to being labelled as what might
when
be
you make
seen
it someone else's problem,
right?
Because you can go off and live in the woods, and whilst you're a bit of a weirdo, no one else really cares.
You're not trying to change anyone else's lives. Yeah.
Because as soon as you say, "Oh no, you should change," somebody, they react quite negatively.
But I can understand sometimes. I can understand why it might feel necessary to resort to extreme methods if someone else's behaviour is causing you extreme problems.
I mean, that's the thing with people just calling any old peaceful protest extreme, that protests that has historical protests that weren't peaceful but for good reason are blown out of proportion, and also protests in other parts of the world that don't have as good rules on that do involve some instance of violence are seen as way more extreme. Like in relation to the US assassinating Iran's top general. Iranian people started trying to batter down the doors of the US embassy there.
Yeah.
People say, "Oh no, yes, this is definitely a protest." It's like, well, that's how protest has worked. Otherwise, it's not always peaceful.
Do you think Nelson Mandela was an extremist?
He was considered an extremist at the time. He was considered
But do you think he was? And does the world think he was now?
No, because I mean, most people
so the world
probably at the
admits
time
they were wrong.
Well, here's the thing, though, because
some people still see him as having been an extremist, just one that won.
Probably, but a lot of people who probably, if they were around at the time, or were one of the people with some influence at the time, would have said, "Oh no, he's an extremist. He should be locked up."
Yeah. Was Gandhi an extremist?
Again, he was instigating quite extreme change, created sovereign states through his
He pretty much
movement.
invented the concept of civil disobedience, didn't he?
Yeah, in a way.
Which
I mean, it's changed since, but
yeah.
At some point, I do debate, though, whilst when violent action is taken, there's some uncertainty in what the end result will be there. There's a good reason there, like in self-defense, or to try and sort of bring more attention to something, because someone just standing outside somewhere with a sign, whilst it might pick up attention over a certain amount of time.
I suppose the thing is, unless somebody has an underlying medical, pathological, mental problem, then extreme acts taken by normal people, while they may be seen as extremism, can also be a necessity and can be justified. Because, I mean, you can be labelled as an extremist if you're living in a regime which oppresses everybody and you fight against that. But you can be labelled as an extremist, but it can also be justified.
Like with Ireland, actually, there's a good song about this from a comedy group called Foil, Arms and Hogs. It's about...
There's a good song about it by U2.
What?
Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Well, yes, but this is strictly...
I'm going to get my...
in some relation to Brexit.
My old man reading spectacles on. Foil, Arms and Hog.
Comedy group. Oh, that's funny as well. But here we go, Brexit song.
Okay, well, just going to listen to the Brexit song on YouTube by Foil, Arms and Hog. Yeah, I suppose, I mean...
Basically, with
Britain...
Particularly Ireland, but also like how we treated a lot of places colonially. That it's sort of that incredulity to how
was the
people
British
react
Empire
to being oppressed.
Was the British Empire the most widespread empire in history?
It's the biggest empire in history. At one point, it covered about a fifth of the world's population.
And we are still recovering from that colonial mentality, aren't we? That
yeah, a lot of people have it.
Empirical kind of dominance of the globe. We still feel like Britishness is about that kind of power and that kind of...
Frankie Boyle's tour of Scotland earlier, and he intersperses it with stand-up that he does at various points.
It's weird because I'm sort of thinking to myself, this is counterintuitive, but I'm thinking, well, it's probably easier for somewhere like us to have that kind of global dominance because we're in the centre of the map. But we're only in the centre of the map because we had that dominance.
Yeah. It's also why UTC is based on...
Why
UK
though?
time.
I mean, how does such a small island...
I mean, you could ask a historian, but largely because we are an island.
Yeah, that's obviously...
A relatively big one that isn't covered in deserts like Australia.
And I suppose we're close enough to other territories. I mean, like, for instance, you could think, well, New Zealand are a similar kind of...
But a lot of it's...
But they're a long way away from...
Like, a lot of it's quite a bit of luck, to be honest. Like...
Yeah.
The Spanish got quite unlucky in South America where there was a lot of revolutions there. I mean, we had some revolutions, but ours happened later, I think.
And I suppose there must be a certain aspect of the climate having an effect.
Yeah.
Because we're nicely, comfortably situated at the end of the jet stream, aren't we? But well north.
Like, it would be a lot colder up here, but... Because of our geography,
we are temperate in a typically non-temperate zone, really.
But I mean, a lot of it is luck and geography, and
it's weird looking at it from our perspective because we're here. Obviously, we were born here, so we are here. But it's like,
but a lot of people would like to think that it's the spirit of the British people, and sort of like.
But it's different.
If you ask a British person to anything, they'll probably just be like, I can't be bothered.
It's like those days are gone now. Let them go. It's
also, 400 years of colonial atrocities and a lack of moral compass will help you get a bit further.
I mean, you wonder whether or not if Germany had won the war, whether or not in a couple of 100 years' time, they would have been thinking the same things.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, whilst the Nazis definitely were worse, like Winston Churchill committed atrocities in Africa.
At that time, yeah. But I mean, you look at the Crusades, and
you don't even have to go that far back.
No, but
like in the 60s, we were committing atrocities.
Yeah, but slightly further back than that when you look at like the situation in India, and
even then, that's not that much further back.
No.
I mean, I think maybe last year before, we had to give up territory in the Indian Sea.
No, we haven't.
Legally wasn't ours.
We haven't. Well, we've refused to do that. We're still refusing. Is it LaGuardia or something? I can't remember. No, that's an airport in New York.
I think no, but giving it to the Maldives.
That's still a big problem in the United Nations because we're refusing to give that up.
And also, all the artifacts in the British Museum that a lot of places that we took them from want them back now, and we still refuse to give them to them.
Did the Elgin marbles ever get sent back to Greece?
I don't know.
I know there was a film up here. It didn't gain much traction because it was a very kind of Scottish kind of thing, but about the Stone of Scone, is it? Down, I think it's supposedly traditionally under the throne in Westminster Abbey or something.
I don't know.
Anyway, I'm desperate for the loo, and I think we've perhaps nearly outworn our welcome. Would you like to say anything about Extremism?
I was going to say about a bit of Frankie Boyle that I watched, and then you interrupted me.
Go
on. We are the second biggest supplier of arms to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Which largely causes the conflict, along with Iran in Yemen. However, we are the biggest supplier of aid to Yemen. It feels just bizarre. It's sort of that, under the table we'll make these deals just to make money, but we'll pretend that we're doing the right thing by giving them aid.
I feel like we're gangsters.
What?
I feel like that the UK, that Britain are the gangsters of, along with America, the gangsters of the world stage. That we're selling.
We're the police.
No, America's the police. We're the ones selling weapons, though.
We're still the police. We're on their side. Or we're like the...
Yeah, we're on whoever's side suits us at the
gangsters,
time. But we're happy to make money out of war, basically.
Well, that's what everyone's been doing for the last fucking...
You say that as though it's okay.
Yeah, does not make you gangsters. Gangsters are against the status quo, even if they're doing something immoral.
Only if you accept the status quo as okay.
No, but it's still the status quo whether you accept it as okay.
Oh, right,
That's
okay.
the whole point of it being extreme. Like some of my
it's status quo anyway.
Extreme, but I would consider them to be good.
It's status quo.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. I think we should stop because I really do wee.
No, I want to...
No, because I'll piss myself on podcast.
Oh, no. That would be a shame, wouldn't it? You're going to go anyway.
Say what you got to say. Do what you got to do.
Or maybe I'll just make you wait. See, torture's the part of the status quo.
Doesn't make it right.
I didn't say it did.
I don't like status quo.
The band or the...
Whatever you want.
I don't know that song.
Whoa, whoa, you're in the army now.
You might get copyright strike.
Stand up and fight!
That,
I used to have the
singing
disc
shit enough that probably won't count.
How dare you? Come on, let's finish off. Meow.
Talk about extremism in music.
Stockhausen.
What?
Varese, Poème électronique.
Can you speak words?
Okay, I'll show you. Varese is, I think, Hungarian. I'm not sure. Hang on, I'm gonna look it. It might be French actually. Poème électronique. You've got to see the score for this. It's a piece of music. It's an 8-minute piece of electronic music by composer Edgar Varese. Whoa! I don't know this much about it. I mean, the score it's silly. Right, okay, so Varese composed the piece with the intention of creating a liberation between sounds, and as a result uses noises not usually considered musical throughout the piece. The pavilion was shaped like a stomach, with a narrow entrance and exit on either side of a large central space. Musique concrète. Yeah, it's all...
Oh, I hate this.
What?
The helicopter quartet thing. Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah.
Basically, they play string instruments that are meant to mimic helicopters that they're in.
I've heard of that. I don't know why, though.
Which means that it's different every time. It's completely improvised.
Yeah, have a look. If you Google Poème électronique score...
It looks like a graphic.
Poeme. That's the score. Yeah, that's... I don't know what that... I can't... I'm a musician and I have no fucking idea what's going on there.
It's probably more graph than
yeah,
music.
I think they are seconds, perhaps. Does that say something about a pure sine wave generator at the top there?
Yeah,
Presumably, there are pitches represented there.
There are a lot of sine waves in this.
Well, yeah, but that's not... No, there aren't really any. Well, there's one or two maybe, but they're not pure sine waves. But they're more representing pitches, I think, those. Because this is a sine wave generator at the top, pure sine wave generator. That'll be the pitch of the sine wave, rather than the sine wave itself over time.
Right.
Because a sine wave has to be very compressed in time to actually make a note. It would have to be 220 times a second. It would have to cycle to make a concert A pitch note.
I'm aware of how frequency works.
So you couldn't represent that on a score unless each beat was at 1/220th of a second long. So that's more, I think, the pitch. But I really need a piss. Please let me go. Please let me go.
Right. I mean, I was more meaning like metal music and stuff, but I guess avant-garde stuff would count. Anyway, I think we should wrap up before the
extremism in metal music.
Well,
what do you think of extremism in metal? I don't like screamo stuff. I don't like sort of growling and stuff like that. I like it if it... I can handle...
Yeah, I prefer more melodic singing.
Yeah. I can handle it occasionally if it's got a function. Like, there's occasional growling in Nightwish stuff, but I think it's supposed to represent kind of satanic characters in a role as such. So I can handle that temporarily, but when that's the main meat and potatoes...
But it's sort of like a vocal version of a solo, like a guitar solo, sort of like extremely virtuosic. I might not sound like it, but it is quite the challenge.
Yeah.
It's, I guess, a bass version of a coloratura.
Yeah. Doesn't sound very nice, though.
Oh, it's alright. But I guess that sort of ties in with how punk music...
Speed metal?
Well, that I guess. Not entirely sure. But like punk was, particularly in the 70s... railed against as extremist and...
God Save the Queen, Sex Pistols.
Is that your comment on punk music?
Just I really need a wee and I'm losing my mind.
I can tell. You're not really giving concrete responses.
Help me. I'm going to
Okay, I think we'll wrap up. I mean, I was just dragging that out, but you sort of joined in a couple of times and made your own point, so...
Okay.
That's your fault.
I do like symphonic metal. Where whole orchestras are involved. Deep Purple kind of pioneered that a little bit because they've done
not aware of that
live symphonic kind of they do it. They wrote a concerto for symphony orchestra and rock band.
Okay.
look that up. It's on the usual streaming things. Performed it at the Albert Hall, I think, with maybe the London Symphony Orchestra. I don't know, but
do you want me to wrap this up?
Please do, because I'm going to leak everywhere. Help!
I'm Viral.
I've been the Orbiter.
And this has been Breaking Bollocks, episode 55.
Extremism. I feel like I should go take my phone and record myself having a piss now for the outro.
No, don't do that, you weirdo.
Extremist podcasting.
Fuck off. Go. Stop. You piss yourself.
Okay, shall I turn the recording thing off?
I can do that.
You can't turn that off. That thing there.
Sorry.
Help me. Help.
This podcast is part of the After Dark Podcast Network.